it's not often I get a live audience for one of my lectures on the viscoelastic properties of sodium hypochlorite. So I'm quite looking forward to this morning, I have to say. And thank you, Richard. Yes, and welcome to those who are on. I'm not sure where I look for the online people. I'm assuming it's these cameras at the back here. So hello, nice to see you. Yeah, Richard's asked me to just share some of my experiences in sort of driving innovation through different organizations. And as a sort of, if you like, setting the scene almost for the two main speakers we've got today that are going to take you through some of the thoughts around the people side of innovation. So my background best summed up there. Yeah, I mean, I've worked for some sexy businesses, and that was a business that I ran back in the 90s and my favorite brand of all time. And I ran that one as well, which was great fun. But my career didn't start there. My career started here, the wonderful world of toilet cleaners. What I don't know about the different ways to clean under the rim of a toilet, believe me, is not worth knowing. The trouble is, it's not great for dinner parties. You know what it's like. You know, you've been out of university, you've been in your career for 5 or 6 years. Somebody makes the mistake of asking you at a dinner party what you do for a living. And by the time you have described the different ways to get underneath the rim, you find you're the only person left sitting at the table. So maybe it's time for a change of career. And I kind of thought I would need to find something a bit more exciting. So having spent 8 years then at Procter & Gamble, I then spent a few years in consultancy and then kind of fell on my feet a bit, I guess, and took over as head of brands at British Airways. And this was a really good time to be in British Airways under Sir Colin Marshall, who was the chief exec at the time. And I got to do some really quite exciting things like putting beds into aeroplanes in the mid-90s, I guess is probably what I was best known for. Actually, there's a customer lesson there, actually, because when we put the beds in, you'd think that the customer feedback would all be, you know, it's a flat place to sleep. That's great, different from a seat, okay? Actually, the customer feedback was slightly different. The customer said, no, the real benefit is actually you've given me my own screened off area now. I've got privacy now on an overnight flight. There's nobody next to me. In fact, one lady sent me a letter and said, thank you so much for the new beds. Now, when I travel with my boss, I no longer have to sleep with him. I thought it was okay, interesting perspective. Anyway, then moved into, chief executive roles. First of all, chief executive of Eurostar. What was the challenge there? Trying to get the French, the English, and the Belgians to work together, I think was probably the biggest challenge, that particular. But being Scottish, I could sit as this kind of neutral in the middle, I decided on that one. Then Sainsbury's Bank, which was the world's, actually, many people don't realise this was actually the world's first supermarket bank, the first challenger bank that came in from the supermarkets. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. And then, for the last, I don't know, 20 years or so, 15, 20 years, I've been working around the world, sometimes, with universities and business schools, sometimes with governments, but more often with organizations around the whole area of what I call, customer-led transformation, okay? Because that was the challenge for me. The challenge was always, I was coming in as the second chief executive to Eurostar. They'd had a railwayman before me. That's what they needed. I don't know how a train works, You needed somebody who understood the technology. Equally, at the bank, it was run by bankers. The first chief exec there was a banker. And I was always coming in as the second guy, and the idea being, we've got a great product, but we've got no customers. What are we going to do about it? So I would come in to try and get the customer to the center of the business. And that really was the challenge for me as I went through it all. And you've got very different businesses, because like Procter & Gamble and British Airways in those days, and yes, we can talk later about what's gone wrong, but BA in those days was at the top of its game, and that was great. So innovation there was, how do you stay ahead of the competition? You're already actually up there, so it's not like you've got somebody else to copy or chat. It's how do you stay ahead? How do you trailblaze, if you like? Eurostar and Sainsbury's Bank were a bit different. I mean, these were businesses in trouble. So, it was a kind of rescue job, if you like. But I'll tell you about my first day. I remember my first day at Eurostar. I arrived and there was this press conference going on. I thought, oh, fantastic, introducing the new chief executive. Here I am, Nothing to do with me, okay? It was announcing last year's results. A loss of £206 million. Well, thank you. She told me that before I signed my contract. I guess I'm here now, okay. That was problem number one on day one. Problem number two on day one, we've got no service. You remember there was a fire in the Channel Tunnel not long after it opened? No service for 6 months, okay, I promise you, this is no word of a lie. That fire was the day after I signed my contract to join Eurostar. Really it was, November 1996, or 97, but I can't remember which one. Problem number three, all the French workers were on strike today, so they're like, welcome to your new job. Actually, the French being on strike wasn't the big issue because it was Thursday. But anyway, look, very different, but there's some common themes. And the biggest common theme for me really was saying, look, actually, our business is really different, or are we all the same? And, okay, my lessons come from, the BA and, some of which overlap with some of the industries you come from, a lot don't. But if I look at the businesses I've worked with since, you know what? We're all sharing the same problems. I'm willing to bet, and we'll get into it later on in the day, that a lot of the things that you raised as your barriers to innovation or whatever are exactly the same, no matter what industry you're in or what business we're in. And you look at the external influences on innovation at the moment, whether it's the things that were going on even before COVID, like digital transformation and increased regulation in many of our industries, whether it was things like, the way the customer world's changing, they're more knowledgeable than they used to be, they're more challenging than they used to be. And that's before you even get to COVID. Guess what? We're all facing those. We're all having to go those same challenges. And things like uncertainty and risk and everything are all part of the environment. And that's something that I know we're going to touch on later on. So what can we control, in all of this uncertainty? Well, one of the things we can control is our own behavior. We're going to come to a lot of that in the day. But the other thing was this, which was actually the common theme for me was it's not about us. It's actually about the customer's world. And the challenge was, how do you genuinely put the customer at the center of this drive for innovation or whatever through the business? And that's what I'm going to share with you, some lessons that I picked up on that kind of area. So what you find, and you may find this in your organizations, I don't know, is quite often there's a really strong statement of intent around customer centricity. Customer is our king, or we put it into a value statement or a mission statement or something like that. That's great. But all it says is we want to be customer centric, okay? And then we get this bit about, net promoter scores and all this kind of measurements afterwards and customer satisfaction surveys. All that says is, were we customer centric or not? There's this big bit in the middle called actually doing it. And I guess that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences. Now, what I would say at the very beginning of this piece, I'm not a world guru, I'm not a world expert, I'm not a university professor who understands this stuff. I'm just going to share some lessons that I learned in trying to do it. And as you'll see, quite often by getting it wrong as well. But so it's just practical lessons that I learned in the doing it bit, if you like. So just one thing very quickly though, and it kind of relates to why I'm really, really pleased that it's largely an HR audience here for today's event. And it's this, that when we talk about customers and customer-led innovation or customer-led transformation, there's a tendency to always think externally, that the customer is that person outside the organization, the person that's buying our product, or other stakeholders and influencers like the regulator or whatever. But of course, there's this other customer as well, called the internal customer, the rest of the organization. And for me, that was always the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge was not actually necessarily working out what the strategy for innovation was going to be. It was, how do you take the organization with you on that journey? How do you take the team with you? And that's why, for me, HR role is absolutely critical, because to be honest with you, you don't need a whole organization to write the innovation strategy or decide what you want to do, but you need the whole organization to take you there. And that's why you guys, for me, are absolutely the critical, I was going to say the critical tool. I don't mean that in an offensive way. You know what I mean? You guys are critical in making it happen. So what are the kind of the 3 or 4 lessons I'm going to share with you? Number 1 says this. It's a kind of left to right process the way I used to look at it. And the first one was, you've got to go back to basics. You've got to get out there and say, have we actually really understood what's going on in the customer's world at the present moment? And as I say, think internal customer as well as external here. You can apply this just as easily to internal customer. Getting that understanding was the critical first step. Turning that into a platform for the innovation or transformation, whatever we're going to do, then became the next stage. And then when you've got that, it allows you then to expand out into bringing fresh thinking in, which ties obviously into the innovation theme, and also thinking about that engagement and how we're going to engage with people. So I'm going to talk about the kind of the 4 of those as we go across. And look at that, I'm actually 35 seconds ahead of where I should be. Brilliant, good, right. Okay, number 1. Getting close to the customer, bringing the customer with you on that journey. I want to talk about a couple of things there. The first thing was, when I went into new organizations, it's amazing. Have you noticed in our organization how obsessed we are with data these days? There's so much data out there. There's new technologies, whatever. We're swamped with it. In fact, the good news is there's lots of new data. The bad news is there's lots of new data, because we just don't know how to cope with it all. And the problem I found was lots of organizations then fall into a trap of thinking the data is the insight. No, it's not. It's just the data. I mean, a classic case was I was traveling through, I live in Edinburgh in Scotland, okay, and I was traveling through the airport. This is just before COVID. And I'd had a particularly bad time at security, tends to happen in Edinburgh. And they came up with this screen at the end of it that said, tell us what you thought about it. Well, I'd had a bad time, so I thought, I'm going to push the grumpy face today. I'm going red, So I pushed the red thing, and it says, tell us why. And it gave me a bunch of options there. Was it the wayfinding, the scanners? Why are you grumpy? Now, none of those were the reason I was grumpy particularly or whatever, but there was a button there called Other. So I thought, that's great, I'll push the other button, then I'll be able to tell them. So I pushed the other button. What came up on the screen? How much wiser are they? Do they actually have any insight as to why I was... What are they going to do? Have a meeting tomorrow to discuss that other problem? Other comes up a lot, doesn't it? We need to discuss what we're going to do about that. It's crazy. It's technology and data for the sake of it, not insight. So what do organizations then start to do? Well, they start to say, okay, data's one thing, we still need it, but what we also need to do is put ourselves into the customer's shoes. Let's look at the customer journey, let's look at the customer's shoes, and let's see if we can spot the opportunities for innovation from that. Great, and we need to do it because we need to understand the touch points. But where do customers make their decisions? Do they make them in their shoes? No, they don't. They make them up here. So the journey that we really needed to understand was not the customer's physical journey, it was the customer's mental journey. Understand what's going on in their head as they go through the process, because that's the bit we need to influence if we're going to influence their behavior. And that meant getting into things like, hopefully it still work their way, soft insights, feelings, stories, language, these sorts of things that became important. Great in theory, does it actually work in practice? Well, yeah, actually, that was the key to the Sainsbury's Bank issue. Sainsbury's Bank was built on customer data, standard customer insight work, okay? Who are Sainsbury's shoppers? ABC1 social groups. What is the list of their financial needs? What products do they like to have? And then we built the Sainsbury's Bank Information Centre, a leaflet rack in the corner of your supermarket. When was the last time you visited the information centre at your local supermarket? Have you ever visited it? Because nobody visited that, In a bank retail branch, perfect. That was the banking model. You do a leaflet rack. In a retail bank, that's fantastic. It's exactly what people go in expecting. But we're not in a retail bank, we're in a supermarket. So they then said, well, okay, they spent a fortune, about £2 or £3 million on a huge strategic project where they brought in one of the big international strategy houses and said, we need to examine what's going wrong here, why it's not working. And they said, what we need to do is create more impact in the store. So we'll build in-store bank branches and we'll have lovely comfy chairs and tables. And it looked something like that. No, actually, it looked exactly like that. No people. Honestly, they walk in, they look lovely, don't get me wrong. And people would walk in and go, look what they've done in the corner there. Isn't that lovely? Come on, let's buy the milk. No insight. The soft insight that enabled the turnaround on Sainsbury's Bank eventually was this. What mood are people in when they walk into Sainsbury's? And when you think about it, what mood are you in when you go and do the grocery shopping? Are you in a good mood? Some people do nod at that, which worries me a little bit. But what do you want to do? You want to get in and get out. You know what you want to buy. You put it in the trolley and you go. And the last thing you want to do is sit down over here and have a 10-minute conversation with me about my credit card offer while the ice cream's melting and the kids are running up the aisle. I mean, it's just not going to happen, is it? So what we needed to create was a range of very different products that were really simple, really easy to understand. Simple loans, simple insurances. The mantra was they've got to be as easy to buy as groceries. So, travel insurance, family of 4, 2 weeks in Europe, is that one. Put it in the trolley and go. Read it when you get home. Don't try and close the sale in store because it's just not going to happen. Pet insurance. Anybody here got pet insurance? Yeah, sensible people, I tell you. I didn't understand pet insurance. It was a massive seller. Put it beside the dog food. It's great. Until I did some work in Malta, actually, in the island of Malta a few years back. And my son's pet rabbit cost me £300 in veterinary bills while I was in Malta for the week. And at that point, I did understand why sensible people have pet insurance. I also now understand why they eat rabbits in Malta. But anyway, that's the story. But look, the point about it is, we've changed the model, not based on a load of data or a load of analysis. It's based on understanding what mood people are in. Do I have a business case for that? Of course not. But if you've got an insight, and if our people in our organizations have insights, let's not ignore it just because we don't have a business case for it. Let's not fit it into the process that says you now need to fill in 37 forms before we'll invest any money. Go and try it. You learn more by trying things than you ever learn by discussing them around the table. So what do? You say, no, I don't have a business case for that, but I do believe in the insight, so let's go and try it in one store. And if it works in one store, we'll mix it to 5. Then by the time that was in 50 stores, which is only 10% of the Sainsbury's estate, we'd gone from 2.6 to 23 million pounds operating profit, and it was all coming out the new stores. So there's a bit about insight there that says, for me, we've got to encourage our people to be willing to bring through the insight. And just because your boss disagrees with you doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you've looked at the world this way, your boss was maybe looking at it that way. Neither of you are wrong. There's no such thing as a wrong insight. What we need to find out is if it's a useful insight or not, and whether we can go with it. One or two other bits and pieces around insight, soft insights. Eurostar, right, okay, what do we know about Eurostar? It's losing lots of money, but actually it's quite a good product, okay? So what do you get? A queue of consultants outside your door. I read in the newspapers you're losing £200 million. We're the world's greatest process re-engineers. Let me tell you how we can save you money, etc. Usual stuff, okay? So I thought, well, okay, who got in the door then? I looked at it later. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. I looked at it afterwards and thought, who was it that got in the door that really came to help me? And I thought, actually, it was the guys with other kinds of soft insight. And the first one was this one, customer's customer. If what's driving our behavior is understanding the customer, what's driving their behavior? Well, their customer. So if you understand your customer's customer, what you find is you've got a much better understanding of what's driving the person that you're trying to influence. And that's true, let's say, with internal customers just as much as external. And in my case, for example, with Eurostar, business travellers loved Eurostar. That wasn't our issue. Our issue was leisure travel, okay? Our issue was business class is full, the rest of the train's empty. We don't have enough vacationers, leisure travellers. So if you're coming to talk to me about the leisure market and leisure travel and you want to, my door's wide open. If you're just coming in to tell me about how great your product is, I'm not listening. Because I'm thinking, my mind's caught up with how am I going to fill my trains with leisure travellers? What am I going to do? So customer is one. And the other one is this one that says, and this is one that I know you guys understand, but I'm not sure the rest of the organisation does sometimes, is you're not addressing a business problem. You're addressing a person with a business problem. And understanding the person sometimes is the way in. And that's what happened with me. Because if you look at me, when I was in this situation, what do you know about me? My background's in brand management. So there's going to be big gaps in my knowledge in lots of different places. Number two, I'm now 50% owned by government. I've got to walk the corridors of Whitehall and deal with senior civil servants. Well, civil servants, they talk their own language. I don't talk governmentese, Maybe you do. Maybe that's how you can help me. I've got to deal with John Prescott. Do you remember him? Deputy Prime Minister at the time? He had the transport brief. So he was kind of half my boss. He was a bit big to be half my boss, but he's half my boss. If you know that, you can help me. What else do we know? I've come from toilet cleaners and airlines. So I really don't understand the railway market. So if you understand the railway industry, maybe that's how you can help me. And it's my first chief executive job. Guys, I do not know what I'm doing, okay? So you put that together and you say, that was actually the key. And the people that were actually helping me to address the business problem, instead of thinking just about the business problem, were the ones who I found I did the most work with and engaged with. And I find when I work with some of my clients around the world at the moment, when I go in and do work with innovation or whatever, that's where you get the real new insights. Yeah, lots of people can usually understand the business problem, and they can normally understand the problems around the specific task or the specific problem we're trying to resolve. But when you get them onto the right-hand side, that's when you really get the breakthroughs usually. I've done work with one of the big one of the big accountancy firms around the world. And when they go for a big pitch for the audit for a big client or whatever, it's the right-hand side that enables them to get competitive advantage. Another one very quickly, on soft insight, expectations, customers don't, this was another one that we had to pick up with the people, is they would say, but we've got a great product. Look at Eurostar, it's a fantastic product. Why don't people buy? People don't buy based on how good the product is. They buy, or product or service, include service with broad definition, okay? They buy based on how good the product or service is relative to what they expected. So it's actually relative to expectations that actually matters. So have we understood expectations? And of course we can influence expectations, but we need to take expectations into mind. One of my favorite ones of that is, up until 2 years ago, I used to travel the world. Not so much now. And I go to Starbucks in the morning to get my coffee. Now, Starbucks set up a great expectation around personalization, don't they? They're very nice to you when you arrive. You get to design your own coffee. I'll have a single shot wet latte with a marshmallow on the top and muffins and gherkin through it or whatever you want. I don't know. And then they put your name on it, so now it's your coffee and nobody else's, which is a great expectation to set up, unless you go around the world with a name like Hamish. And, I've got about 40 of these, I think, from different places that I've collected over the years. And I'm not so upset that I'm going to storm out and refuse to drink my coffee. It's not a big issue, guys. It's a tiny little thing. But the point is they set an expectation and then didn't deliver. Don't set the expectation in the first place if you can't deliver, is I think the key lesson there. This particular case, of course, is just my own fault for having a stupid Scottish name like Hamish. And, and I do find it, people do struggle. And, sometimes I manage to catch somebody halfway through. So when they got to the B, I thought maybe it was time to help out a little bit here. And then I was doing an event in Kuala Lumpur, and this woman was looking at me very quizzically, and I'd said my name about 3 times. And let's face it, Hamish, not a big name in Malaysia, really. So I thought this will be interesting to see what I get back here. This is what I got back on my card. That's somebody you want to employ, guys. So then eventually I decided, if I forget all of that, I'm going to get rid of Hamish. After my dear departed father-in-law, I'm going to be Bob from now on, because you can't possibly get that wrong, can you? Unless you work at Gatwick Airport in Starbucks, that is, of course. So look, expectations are a big thing. But so one of the biggest challenges early on was to just get this different view of the customer, to get these different kind of insights rather than just relying on the data. Because that's what the competition weren't doing. So if you do it, you're getting ahead. But the second thing says, well, if you want that kind of new insight, that probably means we need to get new ways of finding insights, new ways of actually looking at the customer. And 2 I wanted to share with you very quickly with this one. The first one was this is where I found the real breakthrough. The biggest insights we got were actually when we went in with just a blank sheet of paper instead of a questionnaire or a checklist or an interview guide. Because every time you write one of those things, you've just put a boundary around the insights you're going to get because you've decided a list of questions. But actually just going in and observing the customer's world sometimes gives you much greater insights. And that's what we found. And to be honest with you, that was how we solved the Eurostar leisure problem. We were researching like a railway company. Why do you travel with the aeroplane? Why do you travel with the boat? Why don't you go with Eurostar? You know, we're quicker and easier. And it didn't work. Then when we went with the blank sheet of paper, what did we discover? We've got the competition wrong for Eurostar. For business travelers, yeah, it's plane versus train, fine. Leisure travelers, the decision was not, how am I going to travel? The condition was, what else could I spend £100 on this weekend? I could go out for dinner. I could buy something nice for my house. I could go to Paris for the day, or London or Brussels. But when you realise that, you realise our business model was wrong. We're trying to flog railway tickets to these people. What we should be flogging them is the excitement of a trip to Paris or London or Brussels. We had to change the whole business model. It suddenly became about joint ventures, you know, with the Bateau Mouche or the hotels in Paris selling packages. We did a joint venture with Disney, which was fantastic because they wanted people to go to Paris just as much as we did. You know, we had to add new destinations because if the destination's important, we've only got London, Paris, and Brussels. We need to get a broader offer. So we did, you know, Bruges and the ski resorts and the south of France and all sorts of things. So the whole model changed just because we went with a blank sheet of paper. And this is one that might be worth challenging your teams on in your own organisation as well, actually, is, you know, when it comes to things like the customer experience, who's your competition? In many industries, we fall into a trap of comparing ourselves with the other people in our own industry. And actually, that's not the competition anymore. It used to be, but nowadays it's not. Social media, awareness of everything means nowadays you're judged against whoever else the person sitting in front of you gets great customer service from. So if they're an Uber fan or an Amazon fan, that's their benchmark of what is great customer experience. They don't say, oh, but you're a retail bank, so it's okay, I'll forgive you, you can be a bit worse than them. No, as far as they're concerned, if Uber can do it, why can't you? If Amazon can do it, why can't you? So we have to think, you know, it's a much broader spectrum we have to look at now in terms of where we can find good lessons in customer service. And I'm going to come back to that thought a little bit later. Another thing is, when you're working with your senior teams, idiots like me, okay, don't forget that, yes, okay, as I got more senior, I spent less time face-to-face with customers, but I'm now making the biggest decisions in the organisation because I've gone up the chain. So you put the two together, and what does it say? The most senior people in our organisations are potentially the furthest away from the customer. And that potentially causes a problem, doesn't it? In the sense that the people making the decisions maybe don't have quite the insight we'd like them to have. And I think the solution to that for me has always been this. How do we share? Sorry, I'll come back to that. How do we share those insights? Okay? You know, we spend lots of money and lots of attention and lots of time researching externally with our customers. Inside our own organisation, we've got fantastic insight. They're seeing more customers than the rest of us, but we don't have the same mechanisms and the same processes for collecting insight from our own people. And yet, actually, that's often where the value is. And I say my favourite one, which I gave you a quick taste of there, is again, it's a little story, but you know, I did some work with Sheraton Hotels at one point, and one of my big bugbears when I travel is this. I got these about 2 or 3 years ago, reading glasses, okay? It's an age thing, you know, bits of paper have to get further away, and when you realise you can't make your arm any longer, it's time to get a bit of help. And you travel there, you go into the hotel, you go into the shower room in your hotel. What do you not take with you into the shower room? But what are you faced with? These things. Yeah? You know, very nice and convenient, nice small bottles, but in making the bottle smaller, what else is smaller? The writing. Now, I normally carry those 4 there. I normally carry them with me. I've had them for about 4 years now. I have no idea what is in any one of those 4 bottles. Absolutely no idea, because I've never looked at them with my glasses on. Now, again, it's not a big issue. It's just a silly little thing. I mean, I'm convinced, actually, that I don't know if this is your excuse as well, Richard, wherever he is, but there he is. But I'm convinced that the reason I lost the hair on the front of my head was years of standing in hotel shower rooms pouring mouthwash onto my head because I had no idea what was in the bottle, you know. But the point about it is this: it's not a big issue, but they know it, but they don't act on it. If you talk to the cleaner at a hotel, do you know what they say to you? Lots of people say that's a real issue, isn't it? That, yeah, those little bottles. I had somebody say that to me just the other day. You talk to the receptionist, they give you the same answer. They know it. But in the case of the hotel chain I was working with, the cleaner and the receptionist don't buy those. They're bought by a central purchasing unit in Romania. And nobody shared the insight through the organisation, so it never gets fixed. So sharing is a big part of it. And the other part of it, given that I'm now a minute behind where I should be, is while we're on that subject of frontline and our own staff, where are the best customer insights? They're in the moment that the customer has experienced something fantastic or something not so good. That's when we need to capture it. 2 weeks later, when they fill in a questionnaire or go to an interview, it's too late. The emotion's gone. The strength of feeling has gone. So how do we capture it in the moment? And the answer is by having the right people in front of our customers in that moment that not only have the technical expertise to sell our products or services, but actually have the ability to listen, absorb insight, and share that with the organisation. And you see this in technology companies particularly, that we get technical experts to go out and visit our customers. What we actually need is listening experts as much as technical experts. My favorite one on this one was, I was doing an event in Rome and I was walking up the steps of the hotel and the bellboy came along and said, "I'll take your bag from you, sir." I said, "No, it's okay, thanks, I'm just going to a meeting, actually." "No, sir, I will take your bag from you." I said, "Look, honestly, it's just," now I'm in a wrestling match with this guy at this point over my bag. And he looked me in the eye, he says, "Sir, you don't get this. This is how we do customer service." Now, I'm sure there's a bellboy manual somewhere that says, help people with their bags. But this guy in the moment wasn't willing to adapt. He wasn't willing to say, okay, on average, this is what we do. But in this particular case, I need to adapt my behavior for a customer. So I think there's a big issue about who we're putting in front of our customers. So I've spent quite a bit of time, I spent half my time at least on this bit about insight, because I actually think this is the biggest role we can play with our people and with our organization, because it's how we look at that outside world, how we look at that customer, that actually makes a huge difference. And types of insight and how we get them. But then that's only as good as what you do with it. So one of the next stage for me was always, how do we create a platform then that's really simple, that everybody can use, that means everybody's thinking about the customer as a basis for what we do. And it's kind of recognizing that we talk about value and value propositions. And often people, when they talk about their value proposition, they talk about themselves. Here's what we deliver. Here's what makes us different. No, the only judge of value is the customer. So how do you term our value proposition in terms of customer and customer benefit? And this model really came from consumer goods originally. If you go to someone like Procter & Gamble, they'd always say, customer doesn't care about you. What they care about is what they get as a result of you. So every Procter & Gamble brand is based on a statement of what they call customer benefit, okay? It's not about, let me give you a list of ingredients. Let me tell you how fantastic our product is. They say, what do you get as a result? So if you're like Clearasil, the brand, the skin treatment for teenagers, what do they sell? Teenage confidence. That's what they sold. It happens that we get you there by having a great product that will help your skin look better. Here's a classic one. Any word come to mind for anybody when I put that up? Yeah, we know it, don't we? They've had a one-word customer promise for about 40 years now. Safety. That's what it's about. And if you ever go and spend some time with them, what you'll see is it drives everything they do, from the earliest research projects right the way through to the advertising that kind of you and I see. But it's a consistent theme. So whatever department you're in, whatever bit of the business you're in, what we're doing is we're saying, how can we make this the safest option out of the options that are out there? They used to have do you remember they did a soft top once, convertible sports car at one point, and you think Volvo? That doesn't sound right, does it? And they had a beautiful poster for it. I don't know if anybody ever saw it. It was a lovely picture of the sports car on the beach with the top down, and you had this sunshine and beach behind it, and there were just two words on the poster. It just said, safe sex. And I just thought, well, a great way of getting the message, So whichever part of the market you're in will always be the safest option, okay? And the little case study I'm going to show you very quickly is in how we had to learn the lesson in British Airways. And I'm going to show you an advert, first of all. It's a bit old and grainy because it's back from the early 90s. But I'm going to show you the traditional way of approaching it in British Airways, which is, let me tell you how wonderful we are. So I'm going to show you that advert, first of all, and then we'll talk about it.
This is British Airways Super Club Class seat. The widest seat in the air. But being the widest seat in the air, it isn't the easiest to fit through the door. Now on all our long-haul flights, the world's widest airline seat. From the airline that cares about everyone that flies. Super Club, from the world's favorite airline.
As you can see, we were very proud of our seat. And it's not a bad advert, if you're going to tell everybody how big your seat is, you make a joke out of the fact it was so big we couldn't fit it through the door, ho ho. Why they didn't turn it sideways, I don't know, but anyway. But the issue is not the advert, the issue is the message. What we're talking about ourselves. And we spend millions of pounds all over the world telling everybody we've got the widest seat in the air, And then Singapore Airlines launched a seat an inch wider than ours. We're stuffed. And we've based everything on one aspect of our product because that's the easiest to tell a single-minded story about. What if you want to do something on passenger entertainment or speed through the airport or food and whatever? We're stuck. And at this point, you've heard of a guy Colin Marshall, Sir Colin Marshall, later on Lord Marshall, I think, who came in as chief exec, and he was tasked with turning BA around. And we'll talk a little bit about him later on about what he did on culture. But What he said is, I want the Volvo model, I want the Procter & Gamble model, I want customer benefit to be at the core of everything we do going forward. And he set up a brand management function, which is what I came in to head up. And he basically, that was the brief. How do you turn this organization around so we'll stop being self-obsessed and we actually become customer-obsessed and use that as the basis? This next advert is about probably 2 or 3 years later.
So, 2 years in New York, and he thinks he can tell us how to run things. Well, we won't have it.
It's all right. I fix things. He's traveling overnight on the red eye.
Not first class.
Of course not. Company policy.
By the time he gets in, he'll be exhausted. And he won't have had time to incorporate those new figures I sent him in his report.
He'll be hungry and tired.
I've arranged for the chauffeur to bring him straight here, not to the hotel.
Like a lamb to the slaughter, gentlemen.
Morning.
New Club World delivers the businessman ready to do business.
Pleasant trip.
Yes, thank you.
New Club World from the world's favorite airline.
Love the tone of voice there, very 90s yuppie, have a go at everybody type thing. But hopefully you can spot the difference there. So what was the customer insight that led in there? When do people notice a great business class flight? It's not at 34,000 feet on your fourth whiskey. I mean, it feels good at the time, but you'll regret it in the morning. It's how you feel at 6 in the morning when you step off that plane. Are you ready to do a day's work, or do you want to curl up in a corner and go to sleep? Believe me, I came in from New York on Monday night, and I know exactly how they felt, you know. So let's own that moment. So the customer promise became this. Instead of obsessing about product, what are we going to obsess about? We're going to be better than any other airline at helping customers arrive ready for business. That's the bit that we're going to stand for with business travelers. How would it show up for them? Well, there's 3 key ways that came out. Either they're getting more sleep, or there's less hassle, or there's refreshment. 9 words. Those 9 words became the key to British Airways totally dominating business class transatlantic travel during the 90s. Now, as I say, I know they've lost it now, but we'll come back to that. Why? Well, first of all, this one. It is only 9 words. You know, yes, we need to do the analysis. Yes, we need to do the work. Yes, we need to know we've got the right strategy and whatever. But once we've got it, the rest of the organization doesn't need a 12-page strategy document. I did a conference one where the chief executive sent out to his top 200 managers his 35-page tome about what the strategy was. And it was all great stuff and really good analysis. They didn't need to know that bit. They just needed to know, what direction are we going in and where do I fit? So keeping it really simple was one lesson I learned. With the customer side of things, obviously they listen to you a lot more when you're talking about their world rather than your own. So customer listening was one thing that obviously happens when you start taking this stance, instead of them having to translate it into their world. The other thing was I found innovation went absolutely through the roof. Why? Because we're now asking ourselves a different question. Instead of saying, you know, here's what we do today, let's put on pink shirts and do a brainstorming session about how to make it better. Instead of that, we said a different question. And it's a different question that starts outside in the customer's world. How else could we help people arrive ready for business? And that's what started driving the new thinking. And there were a load of innovations came in the 90s on the back of this strategy. Things like the arrivals lounge. The idea of a lounge after the flight when you arrived in the morning, when you could have a shower, get your breakfast, get your clothes pressed. You know, we opened that lounge and literally within 2 weeks of opening it, we were planning the extension. Everybody wanted to use it. The American Airlines started having to put people in buses and take them to local hotels because their customers started demanding it from them. And we pinched the last bit of space at Heathrow. It was great. So, you know, innovation ideas then start flowing. But more importantly, and I think the really important bit is when you look inside the organization, it's now given a focus. So I went to the IT people, for example, and said, look, I know you keep the computers running. Please do that. It's kind of important. But also, can you have a look at this for us? They looked at less hassle. They looked at the airport process in particular, which is where the real hassle came in. 9 months later, we were the first international airline to remove check-in. It was a bit of card that went into a machine originally. I mean, nowadays it's on your mobile phone, it's everywhere. But in those days, we were the first one to do it. And then ideas come from everywhere. One of the best ideas came from, there were 2 ladies that worked behind the desk at JFK Airport in New York. Lovely ladies. I used to have a chat with them every time I went through. I went through one week, showed them this. The following week, they called me up and they said, we've had an idea. I said, great, what is it? They said, well, you know that thing you said about more sleep? Well, we were thinking, people come to our lounge, they spend an hour or 2, they get on their flight back to London. Why don't we serve them their dinner while they're in the lounge? Because if we do that, they'll have more time to sleep because they've already eaten before they get on the flight. How obvious is that? It wasn't the airline model. No airline was doing it. So we offered it to customers and 85% of them said, yes, please. You know, it was only the ones that arrived late that didn't. So what we're doing in a sense is almost redefining the business. I'm not in the business class airline business now. I'm in the arrive ready for business business. You know, I'm not in the Eurostar railway business. I'm in the Paris business. And I've seen it in lots of different organizations. I did some work with a bank where they realized they're working with SMEs, smaller companies. And what they realized that all a smaller company cares about is their ambition. And their ambition might be to be a bigger company, but equally their ambition might be to have a nice life till I retire, or to have something to leave to my family, or whatever it's going to be. So what I said to them, so you're not bank relationship managers, you're ambition managers, because your job is to help them achieve their ambition. And it almost gives you a different job title, that gives you a different mindset that says, what is your role actually? I'm going to come back to that thought, so hold that one. The great customer promises go up a chain as well. You know, basic customer promises are ones that start with a benefit, but comes purely from the product. So if you take something like Procter & Gamble, you know, consumer goods tend to have fairly basic customer promises. This soap powder will wash your shirt whiter than that soap powder. Is it a benefit having a whiter shirt? Yes, but it's driven purely by the product, isn't it? The product performance. Whereas if you look at great brands more recently, they go up a chain. They go up a chain that says, well, what about, how do you add the customer experience onto that? So Starbucks isn't about the taste of the coffee. They've got to reach a certain level there. But after that, it's about personalization. It's about being on every street corner. It's about comfy seats and Wi-Fi access, etc. Apple, it was about making their computers easier to use than anybody else's, rather than just fixating on the number of gigabytes of processing speed. Yeah. But then if you really want to go to town, you go up somewhere like, have we got anybody from Disney here today? I don't think we have we? Yeah. Disney's one of my favorite. Everything in the Disney world is about magical surprises. That's it. It's about feelings. What feeling are you trying to, how do you want your customer to feel? That really drives innovation, because you're really inside the customer's head and you're really thinking in a different way. And if we can encourage our teams, and when I work with organizations on building customer promises, including a big private bank I'm working with at the moment, and I've actually got these senior bankers or whatever to start talking about how do we want our customers to feel as a result of what we do. And it's opening up the door to lots of new ideas for them. So I'm a big believer in that. Imagine that in your job description. You know, what did you do at work today, Daddy? Well, I created magical surprises for people. Great job to do. But that's actually where we want to compete. If we really want to drive innovation, that's where also the competition can't get us. You know, they can match your product, they can see what you do, and they can try and come up with something similar. But I tell you what, they can't match you on that. So, where are we? So the critical thing for me always was to try and create something where you had this statement of what's the overall benefit for a customer, and what are the 2 or 3 ways it would show up for them. And if you could get that identified, that for me then formed the anchor that we were then going to use right around the organization to try and drive innovation. The second part of what I want to talk about, so that's your platform, okay? So now we've decided what it is we're trying to innovate against, okay? Then the next challenge for me was, how do you bring fresh thinking in now? How do we actually start thinking differently as an organization so that we can actually come up with the new ideas and what we do? And the challenge here for me, the biggest part of this was get out the environment. So long as we've been in this job for a number of times, or we've been in this industry, we are steeped with assumptions and ways of thinking about this is how you do business. And unless you can break that mold, and I know Nathan and Mike are going to talk about that a lot more later on than I can do, because they can do far more justice to it than I can. But I did at least get to the stage of recognizing that, you know, as long as you can see the constraints, you're never actually going to really innovate. So for example, if you want to turn that into a bed, where do you go? Well, in BA days, what did we do? We went to the people that designed the interiors of aircraft for us, right? And what do? They tell you all about why they were an expert at aircraft interiors. So you heard about safety struts and wiring and impact resistance and fire resistant materials. And before you know it, there's 37 reasons why you can't turn that into a bed. So instead, we went to a company called Design Acumen. What do they design? The interiors of boats, luxury sailing yachts and motor yachts in the Mediterranean. For them, they know nothing about airplanes. They've never worked with an airline before. What they know about is how do you create luxury, but in a small space. And they were the ones who played with us. They created the first iteration of beds in airplanes for us. We beat every other airline in the world by nearly 2 years. Don't believe a word Branson tells you. We beat everybody else by nearly 2 years on this one. Because we were smarter than anybody else? Absolutely not. Well, you've met me and you've met my team. You met my team and you realize it's not that. We just stole it from somebody else that's already doing it somewhere. Heathrow Airport on a good day in the early 90s, okay, before Terminal 5, disaster area, too many people. We tried to fix it, we couldn't. And I thought, same principle, who could help us? Where could we go? Well, I'd been to Disney the year before over in Florida. I'd seen what they do in the theme parks. People like going to Disney. They don't like going to Heathrow. Maybe there's something they can teach us. And they were absolutely brilliant. And you know what? It was simple stuff they showed us as well. It was things like they said, why do you have a queue at each individual check-in desk at your airport? Do you remember when airports used to be like that? Remember? Each check-in desk would have its own queue. So why are you doing that? Because you know what it was like? You always chose the wrong one, didn't you? Whichever queue you got in, there's always a family of 13 going to Azerbaijan right in front of you. And you know they weren't there when you joined the queue either, where you looked away for a second back and suddenly they're there, you know. So they introduced us to the zigzag queue. You have one queue, you zigzag up and down. When you get to the front, go to the first available desk. Easy, obvious. Nowadays it's in coffee shops, supermarkets, banks, it's everywhere. In the early 90s, 1993, no airport was doing it. Disney showed it to us, solved the problem. I mean, they showed us some other things as well, actually, which were a bit of fun as well. They said, like, make it really narrow. They said, make the ribbons, bring the ribbons right in so it's only one person wide. We said, why is that? To stop those foreigners from walking to the front when they should be British like us and standing in the queue. They said, no, it moves faster. If you think about it, if the queue's 3 people wide, you think about it, it kind of inches along, doesn't it? You make it 1 person wide and it keeps moving. I mean, it's much longer. You're still going to be in it for the same amount of time as you were before. But in your head, we're making progress. And it's amazing how complaints go down just because they felt like they were always moving. The other one was, of course, the obvious one, which is, if it's going to be a 25-minute wait from here, tell everybody it's going to be 30 minutes. And then when they get to the front of the queue, they are so happy. They've beaten the system. Look at me, I'm better at queuing than anybody else. I've done it. So simple stuff. And what I found through working with different organizations in my career is it's not necessarily also about just other businesses that have the same problem. It can be anywhere. Every single one of those I've worked with at some point because they had some skill or some expertise that was of use to the problems that we were trying to solve at a particular time. If you want a thing on efficiency and speed, okay, in the organization, creating more efficiency, go and spend, or I'll take you there, give me a call, we'll go down, spend half a day with the RNLI, the lifeboat people. Because everything they do is about getting that boat into the water quickly or somebody could die. So it's not about re-engineering your processes. It's about how they speak to each other, how they spot the signals to get started, what they say, what they don't say. A culture that says, if you're a lifeboat person and your bleeper goes off, I know to let you go because you'll need something far more important than talking to me. It's all those sorts of things that come through. One of my favorite ones I did was with risk and compliance managers in the banks. Right? Anybody here from financial services? Yeah, I thought we had a few. Risk and compliance. The business prevention officers, the guys who say no to everything you want to do. So I took them and I put them through a rugby referees training course. And the reason for that, I rugby referee myself, which is why I knew the course. Rugby refereeing is very different from any other sport. In most sports, the referee's job is blow the whistle when somebody does something wrong, and give a free kick or whatever it's going to be. You can't do that in rugby because they're trying to cheat the whole time. It would just be stop, stop, stop. So the job of a rugby referee, principle number 1, keep the game flowing. Number 2, be fair. Number 3, apply the strict letter of the law. So what you do is you referee in a completely different way. You're playing the advantage law the whole time. You're talking to the players all the way through the game. Okay? Number 7, you're moving offside. Get back for me. And if they do, don't stop the game. Look at them again and say, don't do that again, please. I saw that. Next time it's a penalty, but not this time. You keep it moving. So I said that to the risk and compliance guys. What if that was your job? What if your job was to help marketing to make the strongest claims they could, rather than seeing your job as waiting to be shown something and saying yes or no? Can you imagine if we did it with traffic wardens? Can you imagine if a traffic warden's job was to help everybody to park quickly and safely, rather than seeing their job as penalising people when they get it wrong? So there's a whole other thing. And the really big thing here really is, it's by taking people away from their home territory, they're much more open to new ways of thinking or new principles. And then when you got that, you then bring it back in to thinking about, well, what does that mean in our world? Do those principles apply or not? But you've lifted it up to principles level and taken them out. And I found that really, really useful to just play that analogy game with people all the time. So for example, I did some work with, for example, customer loyalty, okay? Yeah, you could look at other businesses that have a customer loyalty thing, airlines, retail bank, what ideas do they have? But if you really want to extend it, why not look at things like, well, what do the churches do? What do charities do? Football clubs, cinema, why's your best friend your best friend? There's lots of things you can do to get people without having to go out and do loads of research on other industries, by just getting our people to just think about their own experiences and what they know. So for example, I did some work with Camelot, the National Lottery, on, I think there was somebody from Camelot coming along today. Is there somebody from Camelot? I think there was somebody on the original list. I did some work where they were looking at trust and particularly their relationship with the regulator. And they were trying, we need to find ways of, we don't trust each other. We need to find a way of building it up. And so what we did there was we just did an exercise where it was very simple. This took about 10 minutes. And all we said was, okay, why do you trust the doctor? Why do you trust your car to start in the morning? Why does your dog trust you? Why do you trust your partner? And by just brainstorming on each of those for literally 5 minutes on each, you end up with a whole list of different things. I've just picked out a couple of them there. The doctor one that came out was because they listened to you. If they started writing out the prescription as you walked into the surgery, would you trust their solution? Probably not. So actually, customers will trust you when they feel they've been listened to, even if you know the answer. It's not about whether you're right or wrong. It's about whether they feel that they've been listened to or not, was the principle that came out there. Car servicing, only as good as your last interaction with the car. The dog, it was, because you feed it, get the basics right. And that was a big one in Camelot. They said, there's no point in us making promises about great new lottery games and things like that if they're still querying our monthly report. We're not going to move them up to the next level. Partner was a wonderful one, actually. I did the one about why do you trust your partner? Got the flip charts out. First thing on the flip chart, because the private investigator told me I could. I thought, maybe we haven't quite got the spirit of this one. But they went through, and one of the things that came out was commitment. They said, you have this thing called a wedding ceremony. You stand up in front of everybody you know and love and whatever, and you make a public commitment to, we are now husband and wife or partners or whatever it is, okay? And you've made that public commitment. And again, Diane Thompson, the chief executive, said, that's our problem. She said, we've never actually committed to having a trusting relationship with the regulator. In fact, we do the opposite. We spend our time bad-mouthing them around the business. Oh, those people in London, they don't understand us, etc. Until we decide we want to have that relationship, we're never going to do it. So there's lots of different principles that can come out from this sort of thing. So what I thought I'd do, we're going to do literally 5 minutes on this, is say, I mentioned earlier on one of my slides about job description, okay? So what I'd like you to think about, just for a second or two, and I'll say we'll only spend a few minutes on this, but think about one of the challenges that you were talking about when around your tables, when Richard was doing the introduction. Okay, one of the challenges, it might be an innovation project you've got going that you've got to go, or it might be one of the barriers to innovation. Okay, now think about who the customer is for that. Okay, it's maybe the whole organisation, it might be an individual. What does success look like? What does success look like? So if you were to talk to me about the benefit of solving it, not the problem itself, what's the benefit of solving it? And give me a new job title. What are you now? You are now the what manager. If you're talking not about the problem, don't want to hear about problems, don't like those, but the benefit. So, for example, in Eurostar, I'm now the Arrive Ready for Business manager. Yeah, that's what I do for a living. I help you arrive ready for business. If you were to solve that problem, what would be your new job title? Just have a go at it for a couple of minutes and talk around your tables on it. Seriously, just see. If you were to turn it into the end result, the positive benefit as a result of solving it, rather than describing the problem, what would be the new title for it? Let's have a little bit of discussion. Just literally 3 or 4 minutes. Just have a go and see if anybody can come up with anything. Folks, if we, as I say, I only wanted to spend a couple of minutes on that just in terms of thinking about it. We just finish off the conversation. Yeah, so I just, as I say, I didn't want to turn that. You've got loads of exercises to do during the day, so the plan was not to turn this into a major one. But I'm just interested if anybody did manage to translate from a problem into a benefit statement or into a positive. Anybody got one they can share with us? There was a problem that translated? Yes, great. Sorry, it's Johnny, is it right? I help new ideas get heard. And what was the problem you had mentioned at the beginning of that? Oh, sorry, yep.
I help new ideas get heard. Something's quite loud. And the problem was in organisations getting senior leaders to listen to what ideas are going out there. That's great. And if you think of the balance there, if we're talking about senior leaders, getting them to listen, that's a negative. You're accusing me of not doing something. You're challenging me because I'm not listening. When it suddenly becomes about, actually, I'm helping the organisation, it becomes much more positive. It's much easier to get people to go with you
absolutely when you start focusing on the benefit as a result of it, rather than the description of the problem itself. And that's what I certainly found. Anybody else got one they want to share? Anybody else got one they want to share? Yes, we've got one lady over here, sorry. And it is, sorry, Joe. Sorry, right, Joe.
One of the things in our organisation is we're huge reliance on people updating their personal information on our people data system. You know, anything from job title to office location, things like that. And the customer benefit, if people did that, well, people will get to know each other across the organisation more. It'll be easier to make connections. So if that was my responsibility to solve, my job title could be Chief People Connector.
Great. Absolutely fantastic. I'm going to take you even further, actually. We'll call you the corporate matchmaker now, shall we? You know, you can, absolutely. Brilliant. No, it's a fantastic example. But it's the positive bit. And I'm going to actually just refer to a question that's come in online, actually, here, that I was shown a minute or two ago. And somebody's asked online here. Today, we're talking about innovation and growth from uncertainty. A lot of your stories are about companies in crisis. How do you balance being honest with people so you build trust without depressing them so they become demotivated? That's a really good question. It would be very easy, actually, to walk out the door on day one at Eurostar, believe me. But and I think the answer, to be honest with you, lies very much in what we've just been talking about. It's we can talk about all the problems at Eurostar you like. We can talk about losing all of this money and the government hates us and all that sort of stuff. Or we can talk about the positive outcome. We're part of a team that are working to this rather than dealing with that problem. And as soon as you turn it into a positive story, it's amazing. People get excited about going with you on that journey. The other thing to remember that I had to remember was, look, guys, I'm on the same journey as you. You know, I've left a nice cushy job at British Airways to come and join you at Eurostar. So this is not about me accusing you of being useless or whatever. This is about we together are in this. So it's not about me versus them. It was we were all in it together. And what I had to do was, yes, get them absolutely to taking the positive stance on it. And, you know, I don't know I forget all this thing about yellow hats and black hats and stuff, but I think I'm a yellow hat. Is that right? The one that always look on the positive. So, but it was an important, now you can't ignore the problems, that they are really there. But what you want to do is get people excited about the outcome if you were to solve them. This is what the future could look like. So how could we build from that? So that's really that one. Now, I've talked about sort of customer insight and getting close to the customer, and I shared a few bits and pieces there about getting inside the customer's head and soft insights and stuff. I then talked a bit about the customer promise and the thought about that it's about the benefit. You can build off the customer benefit you're trying to achieve. And I talked about the more you get up to feelings, I found was even stronger. You know, how would you feel if you solved this problem? You know, in terms of internal problem solving. And I've talked a bit about taking ideas from other places there and fresh thinking. And what I'd like to do is just say, look, the fourth area that I get into, and I'm going to spread this blue bit across the whole of the day, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it now, is to say the fourth area was very much about winning the engagement battle. Procter & Gamble, okay? I don't know if I've put it on that. No, I haven't. Sorry, let me go back to there. Prided themselves on having great products. We've got the best dishwashing liquid. We've got the best soap powder, whatever it was going to be. They were also, in the days when this was the way you did things, they were also the world's biggest advertising spender. Why? Because they understood the engagement was as important as the delivery. You know, one of the brands I had to compete against, which was really, really difficult, was a brand called Domestos, that most of you are probably familiar with. What does Domestos do? Kills all known germs. Dead. Very difficult to compete with, because that was known, everybody knew that's what Domestos did. Guess what? They all do. Every bleach kills all known germs, even dead, because they've got sodium hypochlorite. That's what it does. But they owned the message in a way that nobody else did. So that's why I always say in the innovation piece, it's not just about new products and new services, but it's how we engage with customers that is as important on that journey. And that means it's about people. And that's why, as I say, you know, I've talked a bit about some of the things in terms of creating the direction, if you like, for innovation. But for the rest of the day, we're now going to get into this people area about how we engage with our people, how we not change the thinking, but how we develop the thinking within our organizations. And that's what we're really going to move on to for most of the day, having kind of set the scene by saying, let's be clear why we're innovating and what we're aiming it at. I'm going to hand over to people who know far more than me then about how you actually to take the team with you, because taking the team with you, as I say, was the critical bit.
Hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about
when you get into the area of customer engagement, there's a tendency to think that it's all about communication. And yes, it is about communication, and communication is critical. And there are loads of models I could share with you at the Procter & Gamble advertising model about how you communicate and how you can adapt it, whatever. But I'm not going to bore you with that sort of stuff, because I think there's some far more interesting models out there than just thinking about communication, because it's been done to death a little bit. So what I want to talk about is some other things. But the one thing I will mention to you about communication is one of the biggest challenges I think we face internally is not what is the message we're trying to get across to our teams about innovation or about anything else, but it's the tone of voice with which we come across. It's quite often the biggest challenge. And thinking about the tone of voice for getting our messages around the business, I found was quite useful. And it actually relates back to that question we've got also about how you balance the two. One of my favorite ones on this was I was doing an event in Norway just before lockdown, and I was walking up the street and I passed this fitness center, and this is what I saw. Now, the interesting thing about that is, what does it say about that fitness center? You know, if you're not a person that's maybe a member of a club or a gym at the moment, it says this is not a place that's going to be full of all these people in the latest gear that are going to look down their nose at you because you haven't exercised recently. It says, come on in, we've got a bit of sense of humor. Just come and enjoy yourself. You know, just by the way they put the message across, they've actually given a certain message over.